Route 75 is a 22.8km long tram line running to the east of the Melbourne CBD, through the historic dense inner suburb of Richmond and the leafy inner eastern suburbs of Hawthorn and Camberwell, then out across rolling hills to Burwood and Vermont South. At the time of writing, this is the longest urban tram route in the world and is operated out of Camberwell Depot along with Route 70, using mostly B2 class trams but also some A class. These are both high-floor trams, which put a hard limit on wheelchair accessibility as passengers are required to use steps to board and exit the tram, and I'll talk more about these accessibility issues later on in the video. Route 75 starts at Central Pier in Docklands, which is located on Harbour Esplanade. This is the junction with the line heading east along Latrobe Street, used by routes 30, 86 and the City Circle. Trams on routes 30 and 75 terminate in a short siding just north of the tram stop on Footscray Road, an arrangement which ensures the main line is kept clear for trams continuing beyond Central Pier on routes 70, 86 and the City Circle. The terminus used to be named after the nearby Docklands Stadium, and prior to 2021 was referred to as Etihad Stadium Docklands. The name of the stadium changes regularly, and this meant that the terminus had to be constantly renamed to match the new name of the stadium. Eventually Yarra Trams got sick of having to do this every few years, so in 2021 the terminus was renamed after the nearby Central Pier, matching the name of the tram stop. Central Pier itself, as in the actual pier, was located just to the southwest of the tram stop and at the time of writing is actually being demolished. It was built in 1916 and served as a cargo wharf until the 1990s when Docklands was redeveloped. As part of the redevelopment, Central Pier was left intact, becoming a restaurant and function space. I actually once went to a wedding reception here back in 2017. However, the pier closed in 2020 due to structural issues relating to the wooden piles, which were beginning to rot. Repairing the pier was found to be infeasible due to the complexity of replacing the piles, and the decision was taken to demolish the structure completely, with work beginning in 2023. Since then, the pier has been slowly demolished piece by piece, and at the time of writing, that process is pretty much complete. From Central Pier, Route 75 continues south along Harbour Esplanade, passing Marvel Stadium and AFL House, the headquarters of the Australian Football League. This section of the line from here to Burke Street originally ran parallel to Harbour Esplanade on a roadside alignment along the waterfront, but in 2010 the line was relocated into the centre of the road in an attempt to increase pedestrian activity. Even today, over 10 years on, there is still visible evidence of the old alignment, and most of the track is still in place. The line resumes its original alignment at Burke Street, passing Docklands Park and crossing routes 11 and 48 on Collins Street before we reach the end of Harbour Esplanade. Here, the line curves east, running on a dedicated alignment between Macrae Street and Wurundjeri Way. The line then crosses Batman's Hill Drive before passing the former number 2 goods shed, which was a railway goods shed that was once located within the busy goods yards that occupied the area to the west of Spencer Street Station, now called Southern Cross. Docklands was once home to a lot of large docks and warehouses, hence the name, Docklands, and the goods yards here handled freight traffic servicing the area, and there were also a number of goods sidings leading to various docks and warehouses, some of which are still visible today, having long been disused. The goods shed was built in 1899 to replace aging structures which were no longer adequate for loading freight trains, and was at the time the longest building in Australia, at a length of 370 metres. In the 1990s, work began to redevelop the Docklands area, and as a consequence, the goods yards and sidings to the west of Spencer Street Station were removed to facilitate this. The goods shed was thankfully saved from demolition, but was severed in half by the Collins Street extension in 2002. However, the two halves of the shed are still intact, and have since been converted for other uses. Passing the former goods shed, Route 75 crosses Wurundjeri Way and continues into Flinders Street. At the next intersection, Siddeley Street, there are two crossovers, one either side of the intersection, which can be used to reverse direction during a disruption. The crossovers here are also used by Route 70 shuttle services during the Australian Open every January, which run from here to Melbourne Park. Running parallel to Flinders Street here is a very historic brick retaining wall, which was built by the Victorian Railways in 1890 as part of a western extension of Flinders Street. The wall was built to form the edge of what was left of Batman's Hill, which had been mostly demolished to facilitate the expansion of Spencer Street Station about 2.5 decades earlier. After the rest of the hill was removed in 1892, the retaining wall was kept and formed the barrier between the Spencer Street rail yards and Flinders Street. However, the shape of the wall still corresponds to the shape of the former hill, and is the only real evidence left of Batman's Hill today. The wall is notably famous for being the location where wharf labourers used to congregate after missing the morning's work call, and gained the popular nickname of the Wailing Wall. The wall used to be longer, however the eastern end of the wall was rebuilt in the late 1970s as part of the expansion of the Flinders Street Viaduct, and the western end was truncated in 1999 as part of the construction of Wurundjeri Way. Sections of the wall have also been removed as part of various developments, but a lot of it still remains intact today. Continuing east, the line then passes under the 6-track Flinders Street Viaduct before crossing routes 12, 96 and 109 at Spencer Street, where we enter the Melbourne CBD. Seeing that we've now arrived at Spencer Street, now is a good time to fill you in on Route 75's earliest history. The first cable tramway to open in Australia was the line from the intersection of Spencer Street and Burke Street to the Hawthorn Bridge in 1885. This line was built by the Melbourne Tramway and Omnibus Company, the MTOC, and ran along Spencer Street, Flinders Street, Wellington Parade and Bridge Road to a terminus at the eastern end of the Hawthorn Bridge. 4 years later in 1889, the MTOC opened a horse-drawn tramway from the Hawthorn Bridge to Auburn Road in Hawthorn East, running along Burwood Road, Power Street and Riversdale Road. The two lines were acquired by the newly formed Hawthorn Tramways Trust, the HTT, in 1914, and in 1916 the HTT converted the horse-drawn tramway to electric traction. The HTT was absorbed by the MNMTB a year later, and in 1927 the cable tram line from Hawthorn Bridge to Burke Street was converted to electric traction and extended to Lonsdale Street. The line was extended to Latrobe Street in 1951, and up until 2014, Route 75 trams used to turn north up Spencer Street from Flinders Street using the east to north curve here, running to a terminus just north of the intersection with Latrobe Street, known as the Remand Centre siding, which you'll know all about from my Route 86 video. This siding was built in 1994 to allow trams to terminate clear of the main line, and replaced a crossover just around the corner in Latrobe Street. In 2003, Route 75 was truncated back to the intersection of Spencer Street and Flinders Street, swapping termini with Route 70. However, this arrangement only lasted until May 2005, when Route 75 was temporarily truncated back to Market Street, along with routes 48 and 70, to allow for the demolition of the King Street overpass. After the demolition works were completed 6 months later, Route 75 was re-extended back to Latrobe Street, which remained the terminus until 2014, when a major timetable rewrite saw Route 75 rerouted into Docklands along Flinders Street and Harbour Esplanade to the current terminus at Central Pier. The former terminus at Latrobe Street still exists, but it isn't used by any regular route anymore. Today it's used to reverse lunchtime extra trams and is also used during disruptions and special events. The old curve used by Route 75 to turn north onto Spencer Street from Flinders Street is still in place, and today is only ever used for diversions or other unusual moves. From Spencer Street, Route 75 continues east along Flinders Street, running parallel to the Flinders Street Viaduct and passing the Melbourne Aquarium. After crossing William Street, the line passes the Immigration Museum before crossing Market Street and Tram Route 58. One block north on Market Street is the intersection with Flinders Lane, where Route 58 does a dogleg turn from Market Street into William Street. If you have a long camera lens and you get the timing right, this is a good place to photograph trains and trams in the same shot, as there's an excellent view of the viaduct from here. Continuing east along Flinders Street, Route 75 runs parallel to a series of brick vaults built into the side of the viaduct. These are known as the Banana Alley Vaults, named due to the fact that bananas used to be stored there. The vaults were built as part of the construction of the viaduct by the Victorian Railways in 1891 as a means of providing some extra income by renting them out to businesses for storage, and today the vaults are home to various businesses, including a bunch of gyms for some reason. The line then crosses Queen Street, which is the city's main north-south bus corridor, before we arrive at the intersection with Elizabeth Street. Towering over the intersection here is the Elizabeth Street Clock Tower, part of Flinders Street Station. Flinders Street Station is the hub of the suburban network and occupies the area south of Flinders Street from here to Swanston Street. At the base of the clock tower there is an entrance to the station, and just around a corner in Elizabeth Street is the terminus of routes 19, 57 and 59, which all run north-south through the city on Elizabeth Street. A significant number of rail passengers interchange with trams here and vice versa, so to deal with this inundation of pedestrians there is a scramble crossing here. For those who don't know what a scramble crossing is, it's a pedestrian crossing where pedestrians can cross in different directions at once. The crossing at Elizabeth Street is the only scramble crossing in the CBD. However, there are a few others scattered around Melbourne, most of which are in the inner suburbs. Continuing east from Elizabeth Street, Route 75 ascends up a small hill. At the time of writing, both the eastbound and westbound lanes of Flinders Street are currently closed to allow for construction of Town Hall Station, which is part of the Melbourne Metro Tunnel, set to open in 2025. At the top of the hill, we emerge into by far the most iconic intersection in Melbourne, the intersection of Flinders Street and Swanston Street, where Route 75 crosses the busiest tram corridor in the world, carrying routes 1, 3, 5, 6, 16, 64, 67, and 72. This intersection is surrounded by Melbourne landmarks on all four corners, namely Federation Square, St Paul's Cathedral, the historic Young and Jackson Hotel, and the aforementioned Flinders Street Station. The main entrance to Flinders Street Station is on the southeastern corner of the intersection and is one of the most iconic structures in Melbourne, featuring a domed roof and the iconic Flinders Street clocks. The current Flinders Street clocks date from 1860 and were initially fitted to the original station building, being relocated to the current building upon its completion in 1910. These clocks still show the departure times of trains today, however not all of them are accurate and not all of them are up to date. On the opposite corner of the intersection is a large temporary acoustic shed, which by the time this video is released may have already been taken down. This was the site of the entrance to Princess Bridge Station, which existed from 1859 to 1980 when it was formally amalgamated into Flinders Street. In 1966, the original entrance was demolished as part of the Princess Gate development, which saw 2 office towers built over the station. These towers, along with Princess Bridge Station itself, were finally demolished in 1997 to make way for Federation Square, and today the only remnant of Princess Bridge Station is Flinders Street Platform 14. From Swanston Street, Route 75 continues east past Federation Square and the Forum Theatre to Russell Street. There's another crossover here, providing a place for inbound trams to reverse direction in case of a disruption. About 200 metres east of Russell Street is the intersection with Exhibition Street and Batman Avenue. This is the location of a junction, with Route 70 turning south down Batman Avenue to head towards the Tennis Centre, while Route 75 continues east. Although this isn't the last we're going to see of Route 70, as we'll discover a bit later. This junction was installed in 1999 when Batman Avenue was realigned to connect into Flinders Street and Exhibition Street as part of the CityLink project, replacing the former alignment along the bank of the Yarra to Swanston Street, which was also the alignment of the tram line prior to this point. Continuing east, we then reach the eastern end of the CBD at Spring Street. This is the location of a triangular junction with the lines heading north along Spring Street and east along Wellington Parade. From Flinders Street, Route 75 continues east into Wellington Parade, and Route 48 also joins the line here, coming out of Spring Street. And for the next 3.5 kilometres, Route 48 shares the line with Route 75. Meanwhile, the city circle comes in from Spring Street and turns west onto Flinders Street. Up until 2009, Route 48 used to follow Route 75 along Flinders Street through the city, but in that year, Route 48 was diverted to run through the city on Collins Street to the then new terminus at Victoria Harbour, and some modifications were made to the junction at the intersection of Flinders Street and Spring Street to facilitate this. This modification involved the addition of a curve on the northeastern corner of the intersection, allowing access to Spring Street from Wellington Parade. In addition to being used by Route 48, the new east to north curve here can also be used by Route 75 trams to divert via Spring Street and Latrobe Street in the event of a disruption to the line on Flinders Street, resuming the normal route at Central Pier, and this is something I have seen happen once. Leaving the Melbourne CBD, Route 75 heads east along Wellington Parade, descending down the side of a small hill and entering the suburb of East Melbourne. The area north of Wellington Parade is occupied by the Treasury Gardens and the much larger Fitzroy Gardens. They're often treated as one large park, given they're separated by a road, and form a combined 36 hectares of parkland and open space really close to the city. At Jolimont Road, trams ascend up another small hill, and at the top of the hill, the line crosses Clarendon Street. No, not that Clarendon Street. Before arriving at Jolimont Station. The stop for Jolimont Station is located just west of the intersection with Powlett Street, which is right next to the station, and is the interchange point for the Mernda and Hurstbridge lines. Now, this interchange is actually quite useful, allowing commuters at Flinders Street Station to head directly towards Jolimont, something which isn't possible on a train most of the time. And likewise for passengers at Jolimont wishing to head directly towards Parliament Station of the City Loop. The stop is normally pretty quiet most of the time, but receives an avalanche of passengers when events are on at the nearby Melbourne Cricket Ground, which is a short walk across Yarra Park. Continuing east another 200 metres, we arrive at Simpson Street, where routes 48 and 75 diverge away to the south onto Bridge Road. This is the location of a junction for a short siding which continues for another 200 metres down Wellington Parade to Hoddle Street, and is known as the Simpson Street siding. This siding isn't part of any regular route, and is used to store trams during special events at the MCG. In the event of a disruption, outbound trams can terminate here either via the siding or by using this crossover, and inbound trams can also terminate here using that same crossover. Continuing east onto Bridge Road, Route 75 crosses Hoddle Street and Punt Road. We have now entered the suburb of Richmond, which the line passes straight through for the next 2 kilometres. If you want a quintessential example of old inner Melbourne, look no further than Richmond. It's a suburb which is most well known for its football team and is a very dense place, packed with rows upon rows of attractive old terrace houses, mostly dating from the 1850s to the 1930s, some of which are the oldest remaining houses in Melbourne. This was formerly a working class suburb, and there used to be quite a bit of industry here. However, the suburb has undergone gentrification since the early 1990s, and a lot of the industry in the area is now gone, although there are still a lot of hints to the area's industrial past, including quite a few warehouse buildings which have been repurposed for residential use. Bridge Road is one of the 3 main shopping strips in Richmond and is lined with historic buildings which mostly date from the late 19th century. It's a very popular place, particularly for tourists, and is quite well known for its abundance of restaurants, pubs, bars and cafes, as well as all manner of shops including a number of factory outlets. All in all, it's a very typical inner suburban scene. On this section of Bridge Road, trams share a lane with road traffic, an arrangement commonly referred to as mixed traffic running, and this part of Bridge Road can get pretty busy, which can sometimes result in trams being delayed by road traffic. Continuing east, Route 75 passes the Epworth Hospital, which opened in 1920. However, the building facing Bridge Road dates from 1982 when the hospital was expanded to the south, and the original building from the 1920s is on the other side of the hospital facing Erin Street. The line then crosses Lennox Street before descending down a small hill. At the bottom of the hill, the line crosses Church Street and Tram Route 78, one of the 2 tram routes which don't run into the CBD. At Church Street, Bridge Road widens significantly, with trams getting their own dedicated lane in each direction here, although this isn't the last we'll see of mixed traffic running. While trams don't share a lane with road traffic here, the separation between trams and cars is very minimal, and there is a constant risk of motorists making dangerous turns in front of trams here. Continuing east, trams are able to pick up speed, continuing in a dead straight line down Bridge Road. Shortly after Church Street, the line passes the historic Richmond Town Hall, which is an iconic local landmark and is still in use today, housing the main council chambers and administrative offices of the City of Yarra. The line then continues east with shops on either side. After about 1 kilometre, trams enter mixed traffic again before crossing the Yarra River on the very historic Hawthorn Bridge, which dates from 1861 and is one of the oldest metal bridges in Australia. At this point, the character of the line changes quite a bit as we leave the dense, historic inner suburb of Richmond behind and enter the leafy, hilly and wealthy inner eastern suburbs. On the other side of the bridge, the line enters the suburb of Hawthorn before we arrive at the Hawthorn Bridge tram stop, the junction with Route 48, which turns north up Church Street. No, not that Church Street. Whilst Route 75 continues east onto Burwood Road. This was the original terminus of the cable tram line when it opened in 1885, and trams on Route 75 can still terminate here using a crossover just around the corner in Burwood Road. From Hawthorn Bridge, Route 75 turns southeast onto Burwood Road before making a gentle curve east. This next section of the line from here to Auburn Road runs along the alignment of the aforementioned horse-drawn tramway which opened in 1889 and was electrified in 1916. Continuing east, the line dips down slightly, passing St James Park before jumping over the Belgrave, Lilydale and Alamein lines on an overpass just next to Hawthorn Station. The line then briefly enters another shopping strip before turning south onto Power Street. From here, the line only runs down Power Street for another 500 metres before turning east onto Riversdale Road at Riversdale Junction, where we rejoin Route 70, which comes in from Wailing Road. See? I told you we weren't finished with Route 70 just yet. Inbound trams can reverse direction here during a disruption using a crossover just around the corner in Wailing Road, although this is a rare occurrence as trams on Route 75 can actually divert via Route 70 and Swan Street in the event of a disruption, resuming the normal route at Batman Avenue. And likewise, trams on Route 70 can divert via Bridge Road. On the corner of Riversdale and Wailing Roads is the site of the Hawthorn Tram Depot, which opened in 1916 when this part of the line was electrified. It operated the modern-day Routes 70 and 75 until 1965, when that operation was moved to the much larger depot a bit further down the line at Camberwell. Additionally, the depot was used for driver training from 1925 and also uniform manufacturing from 1940, but both of these operations ceased in the 1990s. However, in 2003 the site was redeveloped. An apartment complex was built on the site, but most of the depot buildings were retained and repurposed as the Melbourne Tram Museum. The Melbourne Tram Museum is owned by Vic Track and is dedicated to preserving Melbourne's long tramway history, which dates back to the mid-1880s. The museum has a wide collection of preserved trams from every era of Melbourne's tram history. At the museum, you can find examples of cable trams, some early electric trams, including but not limited to some early W-Class, the solitary Y-Class, the Z-Class prototype PCT 1041, and more relevant to this channel, you can also find an example of a Z1 class tram. The museum is only open on select days, and you can find when their next open day is on their website, which I'll link in the description. Anyway, where were we? Oh yeah, Route 75. From Riversdale Junction, Route 75 continues east along Riversdale Road. At Glenferrie Road, the line crosses Route 16 once again. There's a curve on the southwestern corner of the intersection connecting Riversdale Road to Glenferrie Road, which only sees occasional use for test runs and is mostly used by trams heading from Malvern Depot to Preston Workshops and vice versa. Continuing east another 800 metres, the line crosses Auburn Road, which was the terminus of the line from 1889 until May 1916, when it was electrified and extended to Camberwell, and then to Warrigal Road a week later. At this point, we are now crossing into post-electrification territory, so it's time to talk about route numbering. Now, you'll notice in my Route 86 video, I talked a lot about route number changes. Well, Route 75 is no different in that it has had several route number changes over the years, and even better, those changes are much more complicated. Great. When route numbers were first introduced on the modern-day Route 75 in 1934, the line was actually two separate routes, which were combined into a single route in 1965 when Hawthorn Depot closed. Originally, the route we now know as Route 75 was numbered as Route 74, and ran from the then terminus at Warrigal Road to the Prince's Bridge via Swan Street, essentially taking the same route as Route 70 west of Riversdale Junction. The terminus at the Prince's Bridge was at the end of Batman Avenue, and yes, that's the same Batman Avenue which was realigned in 1999, as I mentioned earlier. There were also short workings of Route 74 which ran from the city to Hartwell, and these services were numbered as Route 75. Meanwhile, the service to the city via Bridge Road and Flinders Street operated from Riversdale Junction and was numbered as Route 27. When Hawthorn Depot closed in 1965, services on Route 74 and 75 were altered to run via Bridge Road, replacing the entirety of Route 27 and creating the service layout we see today. When the line was extended to Middleborough Road in July 1978, Route 74 and 75 were swapped around, with Route 75 being allocated to the full route, while Route 74 was reallocated as a short working from the city to the previous terminus at Somers Street. Short workings were abolished in 2012 and were replaced by reintroducing route letters to the network, suffixing the normal route number with an A or a D. The A suffix indicates a service alteration such as a diversion or short working, while the D suffix denotes a depot run. Anyway, back to Route 75. A short distance after Auburn Road, the line passes Toorak Road, continuing in a dead straight line along Riversdale Road through mostly residential scenery. After about 500 metres, we arrive at the junction for the line heading into Camberwell Tram Depot, which is the depot that operates Routes 70 and 75. It opened in 1928, initially sharing operation of the modern-day Route 70 and 75 with Hawthorn Depot. Camberwell took over Hawthorn's operations when it closed in 1965 and has exclusively operated Routes 70 and 75 since. It has a total of 9 roads used to store the 60 trams allocated to the depot, which are all located under this large shed, while the offices are located in a separate building on the other side of Council Street. 150 metres east of the junction into Camberwell Depot is Camberwell Junction. This is a large 6-way intersection with Riversdale Road, Burke Road and Camberwell Road, and along with being a major road intersection, Camberwell Junction is also a major tram junction. Route 70 and 75 split apart for the final time here, with Route 70 continuing east along Riversdale Road to its terminus at Wattle Park, while Route 75 turns southeast onto Camberwell Road. Route 70 and 75 also cross Route 72 here, which runs north-south along Burke Road. Camberwell Junction is also the southern end of Camberwell's main shopping strip on Burke Road, which extends about 550 metres up the hill to just beyond Camberwell Station. It's a very busy place and a typical inner suburban scene with rows of historic buildings, and is lined with all manner of shops, including restaurants, clothes stores, and even a Baskin Robbins, which I didn't even realise existed in Australia until writing this. Next to the tram depot on Camberwell Road is the Rivoli Cinema, which was built in 1940 and has a very distinct Art Deco design, which was once common back in the mid-20th century, and the cinema certainly has that vibe. This just screams 1940s. It underwent a major renovation in the late 1990s, reopening to the public in the year 2000, and it was heritage listed in 2005. Cinemas from this era are quite an uncommon sight today, and I believe the Rivoli Cinema is the only one of its kind left in the entire state. However, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. Leaving Camberwell Junction, Route 75 turns southeast onto Camberwell Road, passing the Camberwell Town Hall, which was built in 1891 and is still in use today, being home to the council chambers and offices of the city of Boroondara. Continuing southeast, the line crosses Trafalgar Road before passing Bowen Street, which was the terminus of the line for 1 week in 1916, after which the line was extended to Warrigal Road. Shortly after Bowen Street, the line makes a substantial descent down to the now dry bed of Back Creek, which now runs underground in a barrel drain. Near the bottom of the hill is Tyrone Street, where passengers are able to change for the Alamein line at Hartwell Station, which is a short walk away down Tyrone Street. Continuing southeast another 200 metres, the line passes the Fordham Gardens. There's another crossover here, allowing trams to reverse direction in case of a disruption, and this was also the terminus of the original Route 75 back when it was allocated in 1934 as a short working of what was then Route 74. From here, Route 75 levels out before turning east onto Toorak Road, the last major turn on the line. An interesting thing to note is that there is another line that runs along Toorak Road about 3 kilometres east of here through Toorak and South Yarra, which is part of Route 58. However, the two lines on Toorak Road are completely separate from each other. From here, the line enters a short shopping strip and passes under a large steel bridge carrying the Alamein line. Now, seeing a bridge like this naturally gets my grade separation sensors tingling. However, this never was a level crossing. The Alamein line was actually built like this when it opened as the Outer Circle in 1890, and the bridge was widened to the west in 1955 when this part of the Alamein line was duplicated. Looking underneath the bridge, you can see that the eastern side has a steel truss, while the western side is a simple steel girder, obviously showing where the bridge was widened. Continuing east, we arrive at Highfield Road, where passengers are able to change for Alamein line trains at Burwood Station, which is a 70-metre walk away down Trent Street. From here, the line leaves the shopping strip and climbs up a substantial hill. At the top of the hill, the line enters another shopping strip, the Burwood Village, before we arrive at Warrigal Road, which was the terminus of the line from 1916 to 1978 when it was extended about 300 metres east to Somers Street. Warrigal Road is a good place to change for the 903 orbital bus route, which runs parallel to Route 75 along the Burwood Highway for the next kilometre down to Elgar Road. Continuing east across Warrigal Road, Toorak Road becomes the Burwood Highway, which Route 75 runs along from here to the terminus at Vermont South. We are now running on the short 1978 extension from Warrigal Road to Somers Street, and for this next section, a fairly unusual arrangement exists where outbound trams share a lane with road traffic, while inbound trams have a separate lane. Continuing east, the line enters the suburb of Burwood and dips down substantially. At the bottom of this dip is Somers Street, which was the terminus of the line for 1 week from the 12th to the 19th of July 1978, when the line was extended to Middleborough Road. There's another crossover here, located just east of the intersection, which allows trams to reverse direction here during a disruption. Just south of the tram stop on the corner of the Burwood Highway and Gilmore Street is the Burwood Cemetery, which, unlike the Preston Cemetery over on Route 86, is actually in the suburb it's named after. Somers Street is really where mixed traffic running on Route 75 finally ends, and for this next section, trams have their own dedicated lane in each direction, similar to what we saw on Bridge Road about 10 kilometres back towards the city. However, this changes a few hundred metres further on at Cromwell Street as the Burwood Highway becomes a divided road and Route 75 enters the median strip. The entire line beyond this point runs on a dedicated alignment in the median of the Burwood Highway, similar to the outermost section of Route 86. This, combined with the separation back towards Somers Street, allows trams a very substantial clear run from Somers Street to the terminus at Vermont South, and most of the stops on this section are also accessible, again, similar to the arrangement seen on the outermost part of Route 86. However, unlike with Route 86, which is operated entirely using low-floor trams, making the platform stops actually accessible, Route 75 is run exclusively using high-floor trams, meaning the platform stops on this section of line don't actually provide any accessibility benefit, particularly for passengers using wheelchairs, as there is still a step up into the tram itself. Continuing east, Route 75 makes a substantial descent down the side of a valley, passing Elgar Road. At the bottom of the valley, the line crosses the Gardeners Creek and passes the construction site for a yet-to-be-named underground station on the currently under-construction suburban rail loop, which is set to open in 2032. The station has been given the interim name of Burwood, but this is definitely going to change given there is already a Burwood station over on the Alamein line, as we've already established. From the creek, Route 75 begins to ascend up the other side of the valley before arriving at Deakin University. As the name suggests, this stop serves the Burwood campus of Deakin University, which was founded in 1974 and is one of Victoria's main universities. If you're well versed in Australian political history, or Australian history in general, the name Deakin should ring a bell. The university takes its name from Alfred Deakin, who served as the second Prime Minister of Australia from 1903 to 1904, 1905 to 1908, and 1909 to 1910. He also played a major role in the Federation of Australia and, fun fact, was also part of Australia's inaugural federal cabinet, serving as the country's first Attorney General. Understandably, we chose to name one of Victoria's main universities after him. Judging by appearance, the tram stop at Deakin University looks largely conventional. However, you'll notice that there's something missing here. Tram stops in a road median which aren't next to a signalised intersection aren't uncommon. You'll find plenty of them on the outermost sections of routes 86 and 75. However, they usually have an at-grade pedestrian crossing next to them, providing access to the tram stop. But there isn't one here. So, how do people get to the platform? Well, the answer is this: a pedestrian subway. Pedestrian subways are a common sight at most train stations, particularly those with an island platform. However, Deakin University is quite strange in that it is the only stop on the tram network where the only means of access is via a pedestrian subway, and the purpose of this is to allow passengers to access the stop without disrupting road traffic. Access to the subway from the tram stop is by means of a set of stairs on the inbound side of the line, meaning access to the stop isn't step-free, so the stop actually doesn't meet modern accessibility requirements, despite being a platform stop. Wow, what a genius move. The position of the entrance to the subway from the tram stop also means that any passengers heading to or from the outbound platform have to cross the line, and there is a pedestrian crossing over the tram line to allow for this. The subway itself isn't particularly well lit. A lot of the lights in the subway were dead on the day I visited, and parts of the walls are coloured in various shades of green, but aside from that, it's just like any other pedestrian subway. There's also a noticeable lack of wayfinding signage in the underpass. Quite strange, given this would be a pretty busy stop. There are two entrances to the underpass from the Burwood Highway, one either side of the road. The entrance on the southern side is located in a small park on the corner of the Burwood Highway and Gillard Street, while the northern entrance is next to the university. Both entrances feature steps, but also have ramps, allowing wheelchair access, which is fine if you're in a wheelchair and just want to use it to cross the road, but if you want to get to the tram stop, you're out of luck. If you want to learn more about the underpass here, Qazzy briefly touches on it in one of his videos on the strangest tram stops in Melbourne, and I'll put a link to that video in the description if you want to check it out. Anyway, back to the program. Continuing east, the line crosses Station Street and continues to climb up the other side of the valley. Shortly after reaching the top of the hill, we arrive at Middleborough Road, which was the terminus of the line from 1978 to 1993, when the line was extended about 2 kilometres east to Blackburn Road. The stop at Middleborough Road is one of the two remaining ground level stops on the line east of Somers Street, as the others were upgraded to platform stops when the line was extended to Vermont South in 2005. I'm not sure why this stop wasn't upgraded, as there doesn't appear to be anything preventing proper platforms being added here given the line travels in the median of the road. It's possible it may have been due to space constraints, as the current inbound stop is quite narrow. However, I don't really see any easy way of fixing this without having to make any changes to the road layout. In the event of a disruption or late running, trams can reverse direction here using a crossover just east of the intersection. On the northeast corner of the intersection is the site of the former Burwood Brickworks, which were built by the new Northcote Brick Company in 1937. Initially, the site was used as a clay pit, and clay was regularly carted from here to the Northcote Brickworks, 14 kilometres away. After World War II, brick production facilities were provided at Burwood, and by 1960, the brickworks were producing about 100,000 bricks per week. A significant number of these bricks were used for the construction of suburban brick veneer houses throughout Melbourne, a lot of which were built in the rapidly expanding suburbs around Burwood. A lot of these houses still exist, so you can admire those Burwood bricks to this day. The brickworks were purchased by businessman Abe Goldberg in 1988, but closed just 2 years later in 1990 when Goldberg lost all his money due to what is described as crushing debt, and he fled back to his home country of Poland. The brickworks were later demolished in the late 1990s, and the site sat vacant for almost 2 decades. However, in the late 2010s, the site was redeveloped as part of the Burwood Brickworks development, and is now home to the Burwood Brickworks shopping centre and a bunch of medium-density housing. It's kind of like University Hill in Bundoora, just smaller. From Middleborough Road, the line enters the suburb of Burwood East and passes the Burwood Heights shopping centre before making a giant wiggle to the north. The line then continues dead straight over a number of gentle hills before passing the Burwood 1 shopping centre and arriving at Blackburn Road, which was the terminus of the line from 1993 to 2005. Like at Middleborough Road, trams can reverse direction here using a crossover just east of the intersection in case of a disruption or late running, and this is also the final intermediate crossover on the line. The stop here also provides a useful interchange with a few bus routes, including the 703 Smart Bus to Blackburn and Middle Brighton. Continuing east from here, we are now running on the final extension of the line to Vermont South, and one of the newest sections of tramway in Melbourne, which opened in 2005. Over recent years, Melbourne hasn't really done any major extensions to the tramway network, aside from a short extension in Docklands, a major realignment in South Yarra, and a new section of line into the new depot at Maidstone. However, aside from these, the Vermont South extension is the most recent extension of the tram network into the suburbs, making it one of the newest sections of tramway in Melbourne. It was built as part of the Knox Transit Link project, and the initial plan was to extend the tram line to Knox City Shopping Centre, now Westfield Knox, which is about 7 kilometres away in the suburb of Wantirna. However, the section from Vermont South to Knox was de-scoped from the project before construction began, and was replaced with a connecting bus service which ferries passengers from the terminus at Vermont South to Knox City Shopping Centre. Continuing east, the line continues to pass over rolling hills to Lakeside Drive. There's a great view out east from here, and is a good spot to photograph trams with Mount Dandenong forming an impressive backdrop. From Lakeside Drive, the line begins to dip down significantly before crossing the very busy Springvale Road, where we enter the suburb of Vermont South. Shortly after Springvale Road, we reach the bottom of the hill and arrive at the penultimate stop, Stanley Road. From here, the line then pitches back up to climb another hill, one of the steepest climbs on the entire tram network, before finally levelling out and arriving at the terminus at Vermont South, which is located next to the Vermont South Shopping Centre at the intersection of the Burwood Highway and Heartland Road. This is the furthest point in the suburbs you can travel to on board a tram, as Route 75 is the longest route on the system, and with the extension to Vermont South in 2005, Route 75 also gained the title of the longest urban tram route in the world. However, to be clear, it's not the longest tram route in the world. That title goes to the A line in Los Angeles, which is 78 kilometers long. Route 75 is still the longest urban tram route in the world at the time of writing. However, it will lose this title soon when the next stage of the Gold Coast G-Link from Broadbeach South to Burleigh Heads opens sometime next year. Vermont South Shopping Centre itself isn't particularly interesting. It has a Coles, an Aldi, a post office, a Baker's Delight, basically everything you'd expect to have at your average suburban shopping centre, and it's a very typical late 20th century outer suburban scene. The tram stop has a large straight island platform, so 2 trams can terminate here at any given time, and there's a scissor crossover about 50 metres back towards the city, allowing trams to reverse direction in either track. The platform itself has arguably one of the best shelters on the network, which has this glass roof which completely shelters the platform and also covers the walkway leading from the tram stop to the bus interchange, which is just east of the tram platform. This is where the Route 732 bus departs from, which is the route that connects the terminus to Knox. Most services just run from Vermont South to Knox, but the full route runs from Box Hill to Upper Ferntree Gully. This is arguably the best bus connection in Melbourne. Services are frequent, something uncanny on the bus network, and are also timed to connect with tram services at the terminus, which is something you don't really see anywhere else in Melbourne. From my experience, it's a pretty decent service and makes relatively good time to Knox Shopping Centre, utilising some well-placed queue-jump lanes on the Burwood Highway. When I visited at 2 PM on a Friday, it took 6 minutes and 43 seconds to get from Vermont South to Knox. However, traffic was fairly light, and had it been busier, it would have taken slightly longer. There are still calls, mainly from the Public Transport Users Association, to extend the line to its originally planned terminus, and this is still a feasible idea given there's space in the median of the Burwood Highway from here to Knox which could fit a tram line. So it could happen sometime in the future if the motivation were there, however, there doesn't appear to be any movement on it at this stage. So, we made it! You've just listened to 17 pages and 7,742 words about the longest tram route in Melbourne and the longest urban tram route in the world. This is the third video I've done where I ramble on for excessive amounts of time about a tram line in Melbourne, and if you want to watch through the rest of the series, you can find the full playlist linked in the description. If you enjoyed this, be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and feel free to join the Discord server, link in the description. Go check out the Melbourne Tram Museum in Hawthorn if you haven't already, try not to get lost at Camberwell Junction, and thank you so much for watching.
Next stop is